Archaeology News, the news you can trust.
Okay, so for our first story in today's archaeology news, we are going to be examining Norse mythology using dendrochronology. Now, climate change can be pretty scary.
But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic.
But if you think it's scary now, in the 6th century AD, around 536, got pretty real. You had 3 to 5 years of unnatural fog, summer snow in China, crop failures all over the Roman world.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
In Europe, this was followed just a few years later in 541 by the Justinian Plague, or the First Bubonic Plague, named after Emperor Justinian of the Byzantine Empire, who contracted the disease but survived and actually lived into his 80s, a very ripe old age in that day. Now, we've met him in a previous video in which we compared his bling in this mosaic to the Tara brooch found in Ireland. Anyway, these natural disasters, the fog, the snow in summer, the crop failures, were caused by a series of events that was begun by the eruption of a major volcano in North America, followed by one in probably what's today El Salvador, although I've also heard some mention of Krakatoa in Indonesia, and also a volcano in Iceland as well. Now, these disastrous years starting in 536, this is actually nothing new. There's a whole series of documentaries, books, YouTube videos, etc. about it. In fact, it's kind of its own genre. However, what is new is this paper, which compiled the vast tree ring data from Denmark in particular, and it used 654 samples from the year 300 to the year 800 AD. Now, the samples were taken from all over Denmark, so there's definitely some regional variation. But what this dendrochronological record that the researchers compiled shows is that immediately following the volcanic eruptions, when soot would have been blocking out the sun, there was barely any growth in the trees, and that you can see here in this image from 539 to 542 in particular. Moreover, the researchers found almost a complete halt in felling activity during this time. However, it actually predated the volcanic eruptions, so that either means this was caused by some factor other than a mass decline in human population as a result of the volcanoes, or simply a lack of evidence. Remember, wood does not survive very easily, it rots. The way that wood would survive in Denmark is in waterlogged conditions, like our friends the bog bodies. The authors then corroborate this with other archaeological evidence in the area. For example, the shift towards hardier crops like rye, which is better able to survive and thrive in challenging conditions. So this may actually be the beginning of the Nordic country's love affair with rye bread. We also see an increase in the burial of hoards of valuables at this time. So that means people are either burying their gold and riches as offerings to the gods to ask for better weather and better health, or it could just be people hiding their valuables because in these times like this, you'd have a lot of instability, so they were trying to safeguard their wealth. And still other studies suggest a 50% decline in the population at this time. Now, this is a really neat and comprehensive and well-researched study, but it basically fits in with what we knew already. It just sort of describes Denmark in more detail. So why is this news? Well, to generate sexy headlines, some journalists, not the researchers who wrote the article, but journalists are trying to link this to the Norse myth of Ragnarok. Now, you may be familiar with the updated version of this myth from Netflix, but in the original, essentially there is a big battle between all the gods and a series of natural disasters, which is basically akin to the end of the world. So the thinking is that this hell period in the mid-6th century, which entailed a cascade of environmental disasters and the death of perhaps the majority of people, the collapse of what small states had existed beforehand, would have been preserved in the memory of people and oral histories. So by the time the myths and sagas were coming together a few centuries later in the Viking era, this tale of disasters would have been still in people's minds and would have inspired the myth of Ragnarok. Well, this all makes sense, and we've seen it before. Real stories that were mythologized and embellished over time. For example, there's the story of Noah's Ark. And we know these great flood stories exist in all kinds of civilizations spread out over time. So the thinking is they must have originated from some great flood that did happen somewhere, and the tale carried on and changed as it traveled. Or the story of the Iliad, which basically originates in Bronze Age Mycenae, and then survived all the way into antiquity when it was written down by Homer. And this would have happened as a rich bardic tradition of traveling sort of poets retold the story and added it to it and changed it over time. And that's too bad, because this really should be a story just about a really cool, thoroughly researched archaeological project that touches on a lot of the themes and topics we've talked about before. There's really no need to sex it up with these unsubstantiated headlines.
See, there's a typical fake news deal.
All right, so now moving along to something that literally is a bit more sexy. It's a story about makeup and cosmetics. And it comes to us from Xi'an, China, home of the famous terracotta warriors, and a place very near and dear to my heart because I used to live there. Now, not only does the city of Xi'an have that terracotta army nearby, but it also has the tomb of the Emperor Qin Shi Huang. He's the dude who built the Great Wall. The city walls of Xi'an themselves are intact, and it has many other archaeological treasures. Anyway, just a few years ago, from 2020 to 2022, an enormous ancient cemetery was uncovered and excavated in the southwestern outskirts of the city. Now, this cemetery had more than 4,000 bodies, and it dated from the Tang Dynasty, considered a golden age of Chinese history and culture, when Xi'an was the capital of the dynasty. As any Xi'an person would proudly tell you, the city was home to 13 dynasties. Now, just as an aside, I actually have no idea how these excavations took place, considering 2020 to 2022 was the height of the COVID craziness in China, which saw the city of Xi'an on lockdown and cut out from the outside world for weeks and weeks on end. But anyway, it happened, and I digress. So a cemetery excavation of this size, which is literally double the largest early medieval cemetery ever found in England, for example, well, something like this would be the archaeological gift that keeps giving, providing endless opportunities and angles for research. And what one team researched in particular were the cosmetics and makeup found around the bodies. I would doubt on the bodies, because I don't think that would have survived, but perhaps even on some of the bodies. What this research showed was that people throughout time have always cared about looking good, and they will often turn to expensive and sometimes off-putting solutions to make that happen.
And we'll begin with her face. She'll receive cheek implants, a chin implant, nose job, fat transfer to the face, mole removal, ear surgery, and a brow lift.
And the researchers used lots of scientific techniques to analyze the remains and residues that they found. Techniques like gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, use of a thermoscientific S-quattro scanning electron microscope, coupled with energy dispersive X-ray spectrometry, Raman spectroscopy, and enzyme-linked immunoassays. Try to count how many cuts that took to get that right. But anyway, I'm not going to get into any of that because I'd be in over my head and you'd be asleep.
The federal government for only $500 million, or the cost of one.
So let's just skip past that to the findings, because the researchers found an amazing array of mac, kind of like an ancient Chinese Sephora megastore. In a bronze vessel, they found moisturizer, which was mostly made of the fat of some kind of ruminant, and those are grazing animals, which most of our farm animals are. However, the moisturizer also contained a bit of seed oil from the Brassicacia plant, and the addition of this ingredient would have prevented the moisturizer from solidifying during the cold or dry months, and trust me, Xi'an has a lot of those. They also found a bunch of coloring cosmetics, so like rouge, blush, lipstick, made from a variety of ingredients, including plant extracts, vegetable oils, and weirdly, the sex pheromones of a casuarina moth.
Well, baby, me so horny. Me so horny. Me love you long time.
Now, at first I thought that last ingredient was sort of the addition of some sort of aphrodisiac, but because the paper makes no mention of a known use for that ingredient, my guess is it was just a contaminant. Some poor moth found its way into the cosmetics by accident. Finally, they found minerally derived cosmetics, like a black bar made of graphite powder that would have been used to pencil in eyebrows, for example. Or they found this powder made out of cinnabar and animal glue, which would have resulted in a red color, maybe a sort of a rouge. Anyway, the point is, just like we are today, the ancient Chinese were crazy about their cosmetics.
Fabulous! Look at you! And a little more on the cheeks. And a little more on my cheeks.
And sorry, broken record alert, but this is just another example of archaeology helping us to relate to our ancient ancestors. They cared about how they looked, and they shelled out a lot of money to improve their appearances, or at least what they thought were improvements. And just like us, with all of our vanity, hubris, and imperfections, we do the same. That links us as people across time and reminds us of our shared silliness and humanity.
Well, isn't that special?
Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.